you were like technically the first digital nomad in a way. Like there weren't really anybody like you at the time, and it was before social media, before everybody was a digital nomad. But do you feel like you have rubbed off on the whole travel and influencer type thing?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of digital nomads or influencers who will sort of be paraphrasing vagabonding. They'll quote their favorite quotes, but then they're not really living it in a sense. Because oftentimes I talk in vagabonding about getting out of your comfort bubble, or about finding ways not to travel with other travelers, but to travel with local people. And so I think a lot of times, and I don't want to be too critical, but digital nomads or influencers, it's clear that they're still in their comfort zone. That they're taking pictures of beautiful things, and they're looking very handsome or beautiful in front of the camera, but they're not really getting into the gritty of the travel itself. Or maybe they're living a digital nomad life, but they're living in a compound with good Wi-Fi and a bunch of people from Europe and North America and East Asia, but not from people where they actually are in the Middle East or South America or something. So I guess the one loophole I have for the people that says, oh, you influence digital nomadism and digital nomads are ruining these places, is to say, well, if they're sitting in a wired compound and not being very adventurous, and if they're sort of living a cliche, then they're not reading my book very closely, because vagabonding isn't about competition with other travelers. It's not making yourself look good to other people. It's about quietly making your life better. And so if you're investing too much time as an influencer and looking super handsome and always making the right decisions and always eating delicious food for your Instagram audience, then maybe you should invest more time into quietly making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, because really the core of vagabonding is about being humble and not comparing yourself to other people, but about quietly learning more about the life there is. And it is, I mean, it sort of feels good to say that I influence this movement that has millions of people doing it now, but I don't want to be too so hubristic as to think that, oh, that makes me important, that I still, even though I influenced these trends in a certain sense, it's good for me to also keep learning and making mistakes and being humble and not comparing myself too much, because that sets a good example of the for people who are maybe using my book to travel in a certain way, but are also tempted to be into that conspicuous consumption competitive aspect of digital nomadism or influencer. So I think humility and sort of quietly improving yourself is a good default, regardless of what societal trends are telling you to do. Hopefully, I haven't ruined any places through trends that have started with a little bit of philosophical salting from my own books.
I think one Google search would prove to people that you definitely have influenced the framework. Maybe not the execution, but the framework. And whenever I was listening to you talk about that, I had a different idea in mind of my opinion on it. But something then came to mind whenever you were like describing the kind of like the real experiences when traveling to the documented, maybe fake type of ones. And it's like, kind of almost seems like the parasocial identity is taking over a little bit. Like people are, I think these, like, this is no shame on like people who are travel influencers, but I do think they started out wanting to live the vagabonding lifestyle originally. That was where they drove from. But they then started to identify more with their audience who just wanted to see glamorous parties, the great views, all this stuff. And they forgot then to be kind of in the moment, like we spoke about. And I think that's the problem. But that's what I wanted to ask you originally about. How did you like stop yourself from becoming that person who just wanted to travel and tell all the beautiful stories? Because I've read some of your stories and you really did go everywhere. There was nothing you shied away from. Like, how did you stop yourself from wanting to go see the glamour side of it and go and see the gritty part?
Well, I was lucky in that I started out as a traveler before social media. I think philosophically, a lot of people go in wanting to be a very pure, open-hearted, vagabonding mindset, but then all of the likes on Instagram or TikTok come from things that are pretty simple. And I've seen this in my own travels. Like I'll have a very nuanced, complicated experience in a place like Sumatra, and it'll get a fraction of the likes of just me on a beach in a beautiful place. And so I think that feedback loop can it sort of cheapens people's travels. It sort of flattens their travels into the cliches that look good rather than the things that deepen your life, because so much of what travel can teach you is through the mistakes, through not looking good and through being humbled and through talking to people who aren't glamorous and learning from them and learning new things. And so I think that influencer world it's very mediated, it's very flattened, and it's superficial. It's driven by algorithms, it's driven by attention spans and robots, basically. If that's the metric through which we seek approval in life, then we're letting the robots and the algorithms sort of decide what we're going to do. You see it on influencers. There's a lot of burnout, a lot of YouTubers and Instagrammers, they're sad and they're burned out and they're tired of feeding the monster of content. They're frustrated that sometimes the experiences that were personally meaningful get less likes and less views than the very generic experience of a very common thing. And so I think the secret here is just to find some sort of distance from the technologies that through which we perform our lives. I guess oftentimes I say you need to travel back in time to 1999 when I first started traveling. Travel to a time before social media when you didn't have that as an option. And if likes on Instagram or TikTok or views on YouTube weren't dictating your decisions, what decisions would you make? And it's interesting to see how oftentimes those are more satisfying. They're not as interesting for your audience, but why should your audience dictate how you live your life? Why should your boss or your family dictate how you live your life? I think we use freedom as a word in travel. Oftentimes it's freedom from the factors that would limit how you live. And sometimes your Instagram audience can limit how you live, even as it's reinforcing a certain aspect of how you live. So it's a strange catch-22 these days. There's no simple way of solving the problem, but it's good to think about it and talk about it and think, could I be living in a more satisfying way if I cared less about the approval of social media? And one final thought there is that I don't want to be the guy who's in his 50s now and is wagging his hand at people in their 20s who aren't living like I did when I was in my 20s, because I understand how we live in a technological moment. And I think that we all have these human resources that within the technologies that we have, we find a way to balance them with our own humanity, because sometimes the best way to come into a relationship with a new place is just to go for a walk in that new place and just sort of be surprised by a new experience, be it listening to the sound of a bird you've never heard before, or smelling a dish you've never heard of before, and eating it and ordering it from the street food cart. I think those surprises are sometimes the most gratifying part of travel, even though they don't always play well on Instagram.